Welcome to this explainer. If you've been following tech news lately, well, you've probably heard the rumors. There are whispers everywhere that the artificial intelligence bubble is about to burst, that the money is drying up, and that the hype is finally hitting a brick wall of reality. But is that actually what's happening? Today, we're going to take a really close look at the current global AI economy, and more importantly, how businesses can strategically extract real value from it during what is actually a totally normal maturation phase. Okay, here's our agenda for today. We'll be covering 1. Is the AI boom breaking? 2. Financing the next phase. 3. Strategy for business value. 4. Power constraints and fusion. And 5. Competing on cost and trust. Let's jump right in. Section 1. Is the AI boom breaking? Understanding market maturation. So to really grasp where AI is right now, we kind of have to look backward. The source material brilliantly anchors this by reminding us that all major infrastructure booms, think railways, electricity, telecom, they all pass through identical, highly volatile phases. You get enthusiasm, overbuilding, financial stress, and finally consolidation. So what looks like a crash is often just a transition. The initial euphoria wears off, the weaker projects inevitably fail, and the market consolidates. But here's the crucial point. The failures are real. Absolutely, but the underlying networks just keep expanding. AI is simply entering its consolidation phase, and it's fundamentally changing the world just like electricity did. Section 2. Financing the next phase. Tighter credit versus cash flow. Let's talk about the money. There are some completely valid concerns out there about tightening private credit, which has funded a whole lot of data center growth. The U.S. Federal Reserve estimated private credit loans stood at $1.4 trillion in the second half of 2025. Now, 1.4 trillion sounds like a massive number, right? But to put that into perspective, it actually represents only about 10% of the total corporate debt owed by U.S. non-financial corporations. So tighter credit really just means a repricing of risk. It means the weaker developers are forced to delay their plans, but it absolutely does not mean that AI investment is just grinding to a halt. And why is that? Well, because the biggest players, the hyperscalers like Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Meta, they aren't solely reliant on private credit anyway. Amazon alone generated a staggering $139.5 billion in operating cash flow in 2025. They use their own incredible cash reserves to fund their infrastructure. They can simply spread construction out over a longer period and keep right on going. Tighter credit is a hurdle, for sure, but it's not a stop sign. Section 3. Strategy for business value. From experimentation to selective ROI. So the capital is clearly there for the major players to keep building. But how are everyday businesses finding value? We're actually seeing a major shift from wild experimentation to really selective return on investment. A 2025 Deloitte survey reveals a fascinating contrast here. Early on, companies rushed to buy AI because they were terrified of being left behind. And naturally, a lot of those early pilots failed. Today, over 2/3 expect less than 30% of their generative AI experiments to actually scale. Yet, at the exact same time, 74% say their most advanced initiative is meeting or even exceeding ROI expectations. Businesses aren't retreating at all. They're just getting smarter. They are canceling the weak projects and doubling down on what actually works. However, extracting that value requires some serious patience. A separate Deloitte survey found that only 6% of executives report achieving AI payback in under 1 year. The reality is that typical ROI on a solid AI use case takes 2 to 4 years. Compare that to conventional tech investments that usually pay back in less than a year, and you can see the difference. If you want real business value from AI, you have to play the long game. The source compares AI adoption to the early days of factory electricity, which is a great analogy. Early factories just swapped a steam engine for an electric motor, but kept the exact same inefficient factory layout. Productivity barely nudged. The real gains only happened when they redesigned the entire factory floor around smaller distributed motors. AI is the exact same story. Adding a chatbot to an unchanged existing process offers incredibly poor value. But high-value strategy? That requires entirely redesigning your workflow. Picture having AI sort the documents, prep a first draft, check the records, and then only pass the really complex, unusual cases over to a human for review. That is where you drive massive organization-level productivity gains. Section 4. Power constraints and fusion. Fueling the future of computation. Now, scaling these high-value workflows requires immense computing power, and that means massive amounts of energy. The physical limits of our power grid are arguably the biggest bottleneck for AI right now. The International Energy Agency estimates data center power consumption was roughly 485 terawatt hours in 2025. By 2030, they expect that to roughly double to 950 terawatt hours. To put that into a relatable scale, that is about 3% of total global electricity demand, just for data centers. In the US, the strain is even more intense. Data centers could consume nearly 12% of total national electricity by 2030. Because of all this grid congestion, a new data center might wait years just to get hooked up to power, which could delay a full 20% of planned global projects. But again, this isn't a dead end. Tech companies are adapting. They're now bypassing the grid wherever they can, literally building right next to power plants, and signing massive long-term energy contracts. The source actually frames this energy shortage as a major geopolitical issue. It outlines a perspective that the United States urgently requires a government-funded Manhattan Project dedicated specifically to developing nuclear fusion. The argument here is that fusion promises an unlimited supply of clean energy, and without a massive, committed rush toward it, the West risks falling behind Chinese advancements in the AI race for global preeminence. Section 5. Competing on Cost and Trust. The Global Market Shift. That geopolitical angle perfectly transitions us into our final section. The text we're examining makes some highly charged claims regarding this global dynamic. It contends that Chinese competitors utilize intellectual property theft and operate as state-linked enterprises to aggressively undercut the market. By flooding the ecosystem with inexpensive, often open-source AI models, the source argues they are putting immense pressure on American tech leaders and actively driving down the cost of basic AI tasks. Regardless of the geopolitical debates, the economic impact is absolutely undeniable, and it's driven by the sheer velocity of the price drop. Look at this. Back in November 2022, processing 1 million tokens cost $20. By late 2024, that plummeted to just 7 cents. That is a decline of over 280 times. And looking ahead to July 2026, inexpensive competitors like DeepSeek are offering rates at just fractions of a dollar. This places immense pressure on premium frontier models like OpenAI's GPT 5.6, which obviously charge significantly more. So you might be wondering, if the cheap models are getting better and cost almost nothing, doesn't that just destroy the value of the premium models? Well, the source argues a critical distinction remains. Cheap, open models are fantastic for routine tasks, summarizing a text or drafting a quick email. But premium frontier models retain massive value through strict security, handling difficult reasoning, and overall reliability. If you are operating in healthcare, defense, or finance, you will gladly pay that premium for robust data protection and traceable audit trails. A prime example of this strategy in action is Morgan Stanley. They didn't just grab the cheapest open-source chatbot on the market. Instead, they strategically chose to work with OpenAI to build a premium, custom GPT-4 assistant. Why? Because they absolutely needed zero data retention arrangements, daily compliance testing, and strict links back to source documents. An untraceable hallucinated answer from a cheap model could expose them to massive regulatory penalties or completely destroy client trust. In business, reliability and security will very often trump raw cost savings. So as we wrap up today, we've looked at financial corrections, gridlock over energy, and fierce foreign competition driving down costs. But despite all of that market turbulence, the source leaves us with this really vital, everyday question. How many times have you used AI today? Seriously, take a second and think about the tools you rely on right now that have AI quietly working under the hood. The answer to that question perfectly highlights our explainer's ultimate conclusion. AI is no longer just a fun experiment. It is permanently embedded into the productive core of our economy and our daily lives. Yes, capital will be reallocated, weak business models are going to fail, and market corrections will absolutely happen. But that is simply the ordinary price of progress. Mistaking this healthy maturation phase for the end of the AI cycle means you're missing the bigger picture entirely. The shift is permanent. So the only question left for you is, will your organization boldly redesign its future around this new reality, or will it just bolt a chatbot onto the past and hope for the best?